My name is Arthur. I'm 70 years old and live in Chicago, in one of those houses in Lincoln Park that seem too small when loneliness sets in. It was over 50 years alongside Martha, my wife, my partner, and my compass. We shared youthful dreams, supported each other through daily routines, raised our children, and celebrated together so many times the flavor of simple American traditions. Time passed, and I now carry the marks of someone who built a full life, but also the emptiness of someone who lost his better half. When Martha left, everything gained the scent of absence. The plants lost their vigor, the pictures seemed to suddenly age, and even the jazz music, which was the soundtrack of our mornings and evenings, became meaningless. My children, worried, ended up calling every day, but the telephone doesn't have the warmth of presence. Not even visits from the grandchildren could fill the house for more than a few hours. It was then that Lucas, my eldest son, insisted that I accept companionship. "Dad, you dedicated your whole life to taking care of us. Now it's time for someone to take care of you, and it doesn't have to be people," he said, smiling with a mixture of tenderness and concern, leaving Pedro, a golden retriever puppy, in the middle of the living room. "His name is Pedro. Every dog deserves a strong name." I had no choice. Pedro stayed. In the first days, he brought chaos to my routine. He ran everywhere, knocked over flower pots, chewed part of my favorite slipper. He woke up at dawn, wanting to play when all I desired was to remain still, absorbing the absence. But Pedro didn't give up. He jumped on my lap, insisted with his gaze, followed me from room to room. It took me time to understand that what he offered was more than distraction. It was connection. It was care. I began to feel a difference in small things. Instead of ignoring the garden, I started looking at the plants again, just because Pedro enjoyed jumping in the sprinkler water. The morning coffee gained meaning. Pedro waited by my side while I ate, wanting a piece of toast that I could never give him. The simple act of talking to him, of explaining the world as if to a grandchild, gradually returned my desire to converse. But what Pedro did for me goes beyond the everyday. One winter morning, when Chicago's sky was heavy and rain covered the city, I was struck by an overwhelming anxiety attack. My chest tightened, my hands trembled, a sensation of panic spread through my body. I sat on the couch, trying to apply techniques learned in therapy, breathe deeply, count to 10, visualize peaceful places. My mind, however, kept returning to emptiness. Pedro, in silence, captured every gesture. He approached calmly, as if he knew that haste could worsen my situation. He climbed onto the couch and, to my surprise, lay down on my lap, resting his torso against my stomach and chest. His weight didn't hurt. On the contrary, it anchored me to the present. His breathing was steady, calm, and slowly I began to imitate it. Within minutes, the panic subsided and I could breathe normally. This intrigued me. I hadn't taught Pedro anything like this. He didn't know specific commands, hadn't been trained. But there was something in his instinct, an attentive reading of my signals, that allowed him to act with precision. I stayed alert in the following times, and without exception, he repeated the gestures as soon as he perceived any sign of anxiety. Even before I identified the beginning of the crisis, Pedro was already taking position, resting his body against me with the same effective sweetness. Curious, I searched for research about dogs and anxiety. I discovered, to my surprise, that there exists a technical term called deep pressure therapy, widely used in animal-assisted therapy to help those who suffer from panic. Touch, weight, physical closeness are capable of calming the nervous system, decreasing cortisol, returning rhythm to breathing. Although many of these dogs are trained, Pedro was a spontaneous case, a kind of therapist who learned to read my body just through coexistence. My routine began to revolve around coexistence and mutual care. Pedro became part of all my movements, from the moment I woke up until bedtime. He knew lunchtime, understood when I asked for silence, respected the time of grief, and, when necessary, broke the isolation with his sincere joy. I started a diary with detailed reports of each episode. Every time anxiety approached, Pedro intervened. I noted day, time, intensity of the crisis, what I felt before, during, and after. This interested my doctor and the behavioral veterinarian, who recommended strengthening the bond even more, offering rewards, affection, and quality time together. There, life began to change. I returned to walking through Lincoln Park, now accompanied by Pedro, who charmed everyone wherever we went. Children made a fuss, elderly people stopped to ask his name, families wanted to know if he was trained. "He takes care of you better than any medicine," joked Mrs. Dorothy, my neighbor of decades. Walking became a daily source of joy. At home, Pedro remained attentive. Sleepless nights, waves of nostalgia, small disruptions to routine. Pedro seemed to recognize the signs before I did. At the first sign, he would sit beside me, lie down gently, and wait for time to pass. Friends who visited noticed the difference. They asked how to train a dog to take such good care of me, and all I could say was that he was the one who adapted to my pain, offering what I needed most, company and silence. My grandchildren began visiting my house more often, excited about the therapy dog. Johnny, the youngest, concluded that Pedro was capable of understanding thoughts and feelings. One afternoon, after a conversation about nostalgia, he asked, "Grandpa, does Pedro feel nostalgia too?" I answered yes, that everyone feels it, each in their own way, including dogs. Johnny hugged Pedro, and I said that, in Grandma Martha's house, everything seemed more joyful when we were together. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters, activate the bell to receive notifications, and share with family members who need hope. Pedro ended up becoming a star in the conversation group at the community center in the neighborhood. I took him to the discussion circles, and whenever someone mentioned anxiety or sadness, he would approach, sit nearby, paying attention. Several people adopted dogs after our conversation, seeking the same transformative companionship. Pedro taught me that small actions change the course of days. Watering the garden, preparing coffee, decorating the hallway with new photos, talking more often on the phone with the children, inviting neighbors for coffee. Grief gained other flavors, less bitterness, more shared sweetness. There's no magic in this, just time and care from someone who chooses not to give up. I continue noting the episodes, improving routines. My doctor adjusted medication doses, anxiety appears less frequently. In the intervals between grandchildren visits, Pedro is always by my side, ready to remind me that life goes on, even when it seems impossible. I found new friends, returned to cooking old recipes, celebrate birthdays with more joy and less sadness. Sometimes Pedro looks out the window, observing rain or wind. I imagine he also thinks about time, about changes, about the way the world transforms. And when nostalgia tightens, he doesn't ask questions. He just lays his body over my legs, waits for the storm to pass, and shares with me the comfortable silence of someone who knows that the present asks for company, not answers. Thus, I end my first chapter, the beginning of a journey of reunions, learnings, and silent affections, all thanks to this golden retriever who, unintentionally, saved my life. I continue my story. Now amid the routine that Pedro helped me rebuild, winter in Chicago dragged on, bringing that cold that seemed to demand extra blankets and a generous dose of courage to get out of bed. On mornings when the sun insisted on appearing between the clouds, Pedro was already at my bedroom door, waiting for the start of another day. His look was an invitation. "Come on, Grandpa! Get up! Life is waiting." I discovered there is beauty in small repetitions. Every day, Pedro guided me to the living room window to see if the rain had stopped. We observed together the street movement, neighbors going to work, uniformed children going to elementary school, hurried bicycles, street vendors selling coffee and bagels. It was as if Pedro wanted to ensure I wouldn't forget about the world out there. Our walks through Lincoln Park became sacred ritual. At first, I went out just to satisfy Pedro, But over time I realized the benefit was mutual. The park was a mosaic of urban scenes. Elderly people practicing stretching, families walking with their dogs, morning runs by young people, and, of course, the meeting of Pedro's friends, as they began to call us. There, Pedro gained fame for his different behavior. He wasn't the most agitated dog, nor the most playful, but he was, without doubt, the most attentive. He approached me at every sign of discouragement, always stayed close by, even when other dogs tried to distract his attention. Gradually, people noticed his special posture. They commented, "That one understands everything you feel. He's almost like people." One afternoon, after a longer walk, I sat down to talk with Mrs. Dorothy, a lady known for her good humor and exaggerated neighborhood stories. We were talking about absences, missing children who worked far away, when I felt anxiety coming stealthily. My hands trembled slightly and breathing became shorter. Pedro, without alarm, sat on my feet and pressed his body against my legs. Mrs. Dorothy saw that and laughed. "If it were me, I would have fainted already. Your Pedro has power, Arthur." From that day on, Pedro began participating in the conversation circles at the community center. There, elderly people share memories, anxieties, and the effort to maintain spirit in the face of age limitations. Pedro always by my side, attentive to each person who spoke. I realized that whenever someone mentioned pain, sadness, or nostalgia, Pedro intuitively would approach, sit nearby, and offer that silent affection that only he knew how to give. It was in this environment of human exchanges that I noticed Pedro changing not only my life, but also that of others. I saw people getting excited about adopting dogs, creating new routines, and discovering renewed hope in animal affection. Stories circulated. Arthur's dog taught Mrs. Carmen to leave home after 2 years locked away. Or Pedro cheered up the bingo group. Now everyone wants to bring guest pets. The nights also became different. Before, I slept little and dreamed only of the past. Now, Pedro lay beside my rug, accompanying every movement. When insomnia attacked, he stretched gently over my legs. His pressure technique worked as well as pharmacy tranquilizer. I learned to interpret his signals. If he became restless, I needed to slow down. If he relaxed, I knew everything was fine. My doctor, intrigued, asked me to continue writing the diary. I began recording nuances of coexistence, from reports about my eating through daily mood to comments about park conversations. The diary became reference in consultations, and anxiety crises diminished. Less medicine, more walking, less sadness on cold mornings. If you identify with my story, subscribe to the channel and share with whoever needs to regain hope most. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next chapters. I began cooking with more disposition, again feeling the aroma of onions browning because of Pedro's encouragement, who stayed waiting for some crumb that might escape. Old friends returned to visit, attracted by Pedro's fame, and I rediscovered the taste for long conversations and for telling our stories to whoever wanted to listen. One Saturday, during lunch with neighbors, we discussed the importance of animals in elderly people's lives. One of them, Ben, confessed he only began talking about his own fears after seeing how Pedro dealt with my suffering. Mrs. Carmen, who before was afraid of dogs, now spent part of the day talking with Pedro at the gate. He served as a bridge between people, facilitating human reconnections. From time to time, Pedro also became part of family moments. My children, noticing my improvements, began visiting more. At festive gatherings, Pedro received everyone's attention, grandchildren competing to see whom he preferred, children admiring the relationship created between us. On one of these occasions, Lucas brought a frame with photos of Pedro and me around the park, a gift that today occupies a special place in the living room. At the community center, Pedro created bonds with other elderly people and dogs. We organized collective walks, and soon the group grew. Stories of overcoming, conversations about nostalgia, and plans to start over multiplied. Pedro, always patient, listened, licked hands, offered that attentive look that seemed to say, "Everything passes, just don't give up." This coexistence brought real changes. I reduced medication doses, increased physical activities, gained more autonomy. My days, once long and monotonous, gained new rhythm. I discovered that sharing my pain is part of the healing process, and Pedro was my main helper. If you're enjoying this journey, subscribe, comment about your experience with dogs, and share to help more people find companionship and overcome real challenges. Gradually, Pedro wasn't just mine. He became a symbol of hope for the group. People found courage to leave home and participate in activities. The neighborhood gained more life, cheerful and diverse scene that filled my days again. In the following mornings, I realized Pedro taught me to observe the world again, to value clear skies, street children, park movement. I learned to be grateful for hot coffee, fresh bagels, sincere conversations, and spontaneous hugs at center meetings. It was as if Pedro asked me, every day, not to give up on living, even though nostalgia was my oldest companion. At the end of this second chapter, I breathed deeply and realized that, despite difficulties, beginning again became an indissociable part of routine. I learned with Pedro to value silent companionship, wordless affection, and small daily victories. Share this story with whoever needs to believe in new beginnings. Subscribe and let us know in the comments how your pet has transformed your life. Time passed, and my life alongside Pedro transformed. The mornings in Chicago, with their sky alternating between gray and light blue, were the stage for my first great rediscoveries after losing Martha. I felt that with Pedro, the city pulsed in me again, not just through streets or Lincoln Park, but through people and stories that slowly returned to cross my path. The neighborhood began considering me as the man with the golden dog who calms sadness. It was common to hear greetings as soon as I left the gate. "Good morning, Arthur. Is Pedro ready to cheer up the group?" Or young people from the supermarket would shout jokingly, "Here comes the canine therapist." This, previously unthinkable for me, revealed the social value of this canine presence in my routine. Pedro became a bridge for reunions. One afternoon in the park, while he wandered around the lake, I saw Raphael sitting alone on a bench. He was new to the community center group, seemed isolated, and carried on his shoulders the weight of silent pain. I sat beside him, and even without opening conversation, Pedro moved discreetly, sitting at the young man's feet. Raphael smiled, petted Pedro, and gradually spoke. "My mother died 3 months ago. It seems I can't talk to anyone." His look mixed resentment and hope. I explained that I also lived with grief, that Pedro was my companion to face nostalgia, and Raphael admitted, "I never thought a dog could make such a difference. It's almost like he understands." We talked there until sunset, and we agreed to return together in the coming weeks. These approaches became routine. Pedro, intuitive, approached whoever was most distant, participated in community center meetings, was part of serious conversations and games. In the group, telling how Pedro helped even in difficult conversations, like during discussions about health or painful memories. He served as catalyst for interactions, creating an environment of trust. At home, Sunday afternoons became more lively. My grandchildren, fascinated with Pedro's charisma, transformed the yard into an improvised soccer field. "Come on, Pedro, goalkeeper now!" Johnny, the youngest, said he only scored goals if Pedro jumped, and laughter filled the house. Laughter I hadn't heard since Martha prepared apple pie for the children. These family gatherings lost their weight of sadness. Pedro balanced everyone's energy, calmed the shy grandson, cheered up the worried daughter, kept Lucas company during moments when he became thoughtful on the porch. I began photographing these moments, Pedro lying among the children, bringing the ball, resting on the hammock after an afternoon of games. Between visits, I invited old work colleagues for coffee. Most faced battles with loneliness, anxiety, insecurity of old age. Talking about Pedro and his therapeutic function opened doors to confidences. One of them, Silvio, confessed he felt afraid of sleeping alone since losing his wife. "Your dog seems to understand what we feel, Arthur. Could I get one like that?" I encouraged Silvio to try. Sometime later he appeared with an adopted female dog, saying, "She doesn't understand everything yet, but she keeps me company. I think that already saves." Pedro also received neighbors' attention. Mrs. Carmen, who before was deathly afraid of dogs, now talked every evening with Pedro at the gate. "You're a good boy. Look at the way he understands everything, Arthur." The neighborhood gained more life. Young people played with Pedro. Elderly people stopped to pet him. The environment seemed less cold and more welcoming with the dogs circulating. At the community center, we organized an adoption campaign to encourage other elderly people to receive pets. Pedro was the poster boy. His calm manner, affection with older adults, patience during presentations enchanted everyone. The result was moving. 10 elderly people from the group adopted dogs or cats in less than 2 months, and conversations about starting over became the rule in neighborhood meetings. If you're getting emotional about this journey, subscribe to the channel, share, and leave your comment with experiences about reconnection and support. Share with friends or family members who could benefit from the transformative power of affection. New dear friends and old bonds were restored. I began valuing the taste of shared coffee, bagels bought for lively visits, conversations with Lucas about the best walking routes with Pedro. Clara, a recent widow from the neighboring district, appeared in the group. We exchanged confidences about nostalgia, recommendations, and the role of animals in building new meanings for those who no longer expected great emotions. Pedro gained with this more admirers. At meetings, he circulated among everyone, sat next to whoever needed companionship most. He walked alongside young and old, created bonds with center cats, learned to respect each limit. He was cause for laughter and sighs, a model for whoever sought to rebuild an emotionally healthy routine. The nights, which before were too silent, became marked by dinner invitations, neighbor meetings, informal gatherings in the yard. Pedro was always protagonist, sometimes lying near the table, sometimes in someone more vulnerable's lap, sometimes supervising with his attentive look who arrived or left. I discovered in conversations with Clara new flavors of realistic happiness, made of small opportunities, mutual support, and courage to admit that life can always surprise, even in old age. At each chapter of this process, Pedro proved essential. He wasn't just companionship, he was ray of hope, instrument of renewal, symbol of true affection. I realized the main teaching was that grief isn't conquered alone, but one doesn't need to be defeated by it. Sharing pains and joys, we create unbreakable networks of protection and growth. At the end of this chapter, I thank for each reunion and each discovery Pedro was part of. I look at him after another night of socializing, and we realize that together, learning to value sincere connections, spontaneous exchanges, and the strength of simple gestures, which make common days true gifts. If this story inspires you, don't forget to subscribe and share. Activate notifications and tell us how bonds have transformed your life. Summer arrived in Chicago with long afternoons and unexpected storms, bringing important changes to my and Pedro's life. With emotional improvement thanks to my canine companion, I finally accepted complete medical exams, something I had been postponing for months. The results weren't the best. Age brought hypertension, high cholesterol, and emphatic recommendation from the doctor to reduce salt and sugar, walk more, plus the old advice to cultivate good relationships. With Pedro by my side, I faced everything with less fear. I began by changing the menu, replacing donuts with fruit from the nearby farmer's market, natural lemonade instead of Sunday sodas. Pedro, always interested, was distracted by the coming and going of shopping bags and more frequent trips to the market, and became attraction for vendors who saved melon rinds for Dr. Pedro. Encouraged by the doctor, I intensified park walks. In the community center group, Pedro was already celebrity, but now he became partner also in my health commitments. Always waiting for me at the gate, He accompanied my trips to the health clinic, sitting politely in reception while I took tests. The doctor began asking about him, before asking about me. "So, Arthur, is Pedro well? Still taking care of you?" I noticed even other patients felt more comfortable just seeing Pedro calm, almost like the neighborhood's official mascot. In one of these appointments, the doctor suggested, "You should participate in that university study about animals' impact on elderly routines." She was impressed with my reports and the diary I started in winter, where I noted anxiety crisis frequency, group reports, and Pedro's interventions. I accepted the invitation, and our story ended up in interviews and academic records. Pedro unknowingly became reference, and the local newspaper did special report about the Chicago Golden who helps widows and elderly overcome loneliness. These experiences brought more people close. I received invitations for lectures, conversation circles, and community meetings. Pedro was always requested and, in certain way, also learned. He began dealing with more people, more noises, more children. His patience increased, allowing strangers or whoever needed comfort at the right moment to pet him. It was also in this period that health surprised me. After a park weekend, I woke up cheerful, but throughout the day, felt fever and difficulty breathing. I was diagnosed with pneumonia and needed strict rest. Fear returned despite last year's advances. The first nights were especially difficult, with return of memories of when Martha got sick. But Pedro assumed even more fundamental role. He slept next to my mattress, brought toys, sat beside me during sleepless dawns and, on worse days, lay over my legs, supported his body, and brought immediate relief to anguish. During recovery, my children intensified visits, and neighbors took turns with soup, short conversation, and small helps. I felt that the network built around affection and coexistence was strengthening, now uniting people who before knew little or only greeted from distance. Pedro facilitated everything. Neighbors approached him to know if I was better and noticed that even on fever days, Pedro was attentive, never restless like in crisis times. Anxiety crises reappeared, but the pattern was already known. Pedro anticipated symptoms. Perceiving my restlessness, he launched attentive look, pressed body over me, and waited until my breathing slowed down. The care routine tightened even more. On hardest days, I learned to ask for help, whether from neighbor, child, or even doctor. Pedro taught me that accepting support isn't weakness, but demonstrating courage and respect for one's own limit. The pneumonia experience brought definitive changes. I learned to respect time and body, to value even more friends and family support network, and to consider that growing in old age is possible when one has courage to ask and receive help. Pedro became even more popular, being cited in center group meetings as our great hope agent. To strengthen this current, subscribe to the channel, share videos with whoever needs inspiration to keep going, and comment how your support network was important in difficult moments. Let's together spread true hope. At the end of my recovery, our daily life gained new flavors. The community center began organizing events more frequently, inviting health professionals, volunteers, and family members to discuss new beginnings. Pedro was guaranteed presence at meetings, fun, polite, example for whoever sought companionship or strength to overcome physical and emotional limitations. I began participating in light exercise groups and even ventured into senior dance classes. Pedro stayed sitting at court edge, observing everything, vibrating during applause and invariably receiving final affection from all participants. One of these experiences brought profound reflection. Hearing testimony from lady who told of overcoming depression thanks to coexistence with Pedro and collective encouragement, I realized vulnerability can be door to new beginnings, and others' support makes us stronger. I became volunteer promoter of neighborhood campaigns, helping elderly find companionship, promoting mental health meetings, and spreading benefits of having animals in old age. I helped organize adoption event, and Pedro was, once again, poster boy. His camera serenity attracted dozens of families and saw more animals gaining homes and more elderly finding pleasure in coexistence. I also noticed Pedro's small evolutions. He began respecting other dogs' tiredness, helping smaller ones in collective games, and comforting whoever showed pain or anxiety, as if coexistence with humans taught him mutual care value. If you followed our story, subscribe, tell your experiences in comments, and share with whoever needs to believe in new beginnings. Each story matters, and you can transform journeys. In recent months, Pedro became Chicago reference, symbol of change, hope, and strength of effective bonds. Summer was saying goodbye. The lesson was clear. With mutual support, respect for one's own limit, and courage to ask for help, challenges transform into daily victories. I close this chapter thanking for each gesture, each conversation, each collective hug Pedro provided. I learned, finally, that there's no ill that isn't eased by community strength and affection from whoever chooses to care. Even if that someone has four paws and look that says everything without words. After recovery and the flood of new learnings, I decided it was time to transform not only my own routine, but to help other neighborhood elderly find paths to new beginnings. The desire was born not from emptiness, but from wanting to share everything Pedro had taught me: companionship, affection, overcoming, and the importance of mutual support. With encouragement from community center staff and my children, I began actively participating in health and wellness campaigns. We organized mental health talks, walking groups, cooking workshops, and meetings to discuss fears, losses, and hope. Pedro was central to this process. His presence at each event inspired confidence and courage. His fame as canine therapist attracted previously reclusive people who finally sought contact. The network formed around me was composed of familiar faces and people full of stories. Clara, for example, was recently widowed and dedicated mother to 2 adult children. We initiated respectful friendship with her, establishing bridges for confidences about nostalgia, routine, overcoming, and reinvention in old age. Clara also surrendered to Pedro's charisma, who immediately welcomed her with those silent affection gestures. Together, we decided to go further. We created informal elderly support network, encouraging whoever was alone to seek collective activities and, if possible, animal adoption. The adoption campaign grew rapidly. Pedro became brochure cover, appeared in neighborhood channel video, and was, once again, star of local newspaper materials. Weekly meetings for animal and elderly integration became community celebrations. Homemade food, long tables, sincere conversations, shared laughter, lingering hugs, and nostalgia exposed without fear. I realized Pedro now wasn't just mine. His affection multiplied joy and disposition for everyone around. The network effect extended beyond meetings. Ben, neighbor who barely left home before, began walking daily through park alongside new adopted dog. Mrs. Dorothy, eternal center animator, became reference in cat care and today narrates her own overcoming stories. Pedro continued protagonist, creating bonds, inspiring changes, teaching daily affection value. If you're following our journey, subscribe and share with whoever seeks courage to start over or needs concrete example of true transformation. Likes and comments help spread hope. Intense coexistence with Clara, Pedro, and network friends changed my perspective on aging. Meetings revealed grief pain doesn't disappear, but can be divided and re-signified with each new bond. I discovered that, even facing body limitations or emotional challenges, there's space to be useful, to grow, to offer words and companionship, and that, more than any medicine, is synonym for health. Over time, Pedro continued anticipating each emotional crisis, but also began celebrating alongside victories. Cake made in collective workshop, dance group's first presentation, grandchildren's birthdays, vaccination campaign that brought elderly to center en masse. In all these moments, he was focus of looks and source of smiles. In conversations with Clara, we talked about new beginnings. Her grief different from mine, had other flavors. It started from painful goodbye, followed by months of unanswered questions. Pedro doesn't understand my thoughts, but seems to know when nostalgia tightens, she said one afternoon while we walked together through neighborhood. I agreed. He doesn't need to understand, just needs to be there. And that's enough. Together, we stimulated creation of more thematic groups: literature, cooking, sports, debates about elderly rights. Each event grew in diversity and courage, showing there's no right age to start again. The neighborhood became constant stage for lively meetings, voluntary actions and celebrations, always with Pedro nearby, intensifying relationships and link options between new stories. The community center channel, which before barely had watched videos, began growing updated. Subscriber reports about animals that changed destinies, families who rediscovered hope, elderly who left seclusion to embrace life. Receiving hundreds of comments and thank you messages, I realized the story Pedro changed forever not only transformed my world, but many people's lives. During these months, I observed profound changes in our community. The small neighborhood park, which before seemed abandoned, now buzzed with activity. Elderly with their new pets gathered mornings, creating natural support circle. Neighborhood children, fascinated with Pedro's story, began visiting grandparents more, bringing drawings and letters for adopted therapy dogs. Clara became my inseparable partner in these projects. Her experience as retired teacher brought structure to our initiatives. We organized reading workshops where Pedro and other dogs lay patiently while participants read aloud, creating calm environment that facilitated expression. Results were surprising. People who hadn't spoken publicly for years found their voice again. The Four-Pawed Friend campaign extended beyond our neighborhood. We received visits from neighboring delegations, local journalists and veterinary students interested in documenting the phenomenon. Pedro, always serene, received all attention with same sweetness, as if understanding his role as Hope Ambassador. One afternoon, while we prepared material for new mental health talk in old age, Clara confided something that touched my heart. "Arthur, you know, when I met Pedro, I thought he was just pretty dog. Now I understand he's teacher. He taught me love has no specific form, can come from where we least expect." Her eyes shone with grateful tears, and Pedro, as always, approached to offer silent comfort. Sundays became special days. We organized social afternoons in community center patio, where families brought traditional American food, barbecue, potato salad, lemonade, and shared stories while dogs played among children. Jazz music played background, and at moments, closing eyes, I could hear Martha's laughter mixing with present joy. If this story is inspiring you, don't forget to subscribe to channel and activate notifications. Share these hope moments with whoever needs them most, and let us know in comments how animals have transformed your life or your loved ones. Pedro, now with more experience in his natural therapist role, developed extraordinary sensitivity. He could identify not only my anxiety crises, but others' discomfort. During meeting, when Mrs. Carmen began crying, remembering deceased husband, Pedro got up from my side and went straight to her. He sat at her feet and gently rested head on her knees. Carmen's crying transformed into smile, and through tears said, "This dog has angel soul." Support network we built began functioning autonomously. New pet owners formed WhatsApp groups to share advice, coordinate veterinary visits, and organize joint activities. Clara proposed creating Senior Caregiver Manual, documenting animal therapy techniques specifically adapted for older people. At chapter end, I make invitation to continue following with us. If this story inspires you, subscribe, send to friends, and don't forget, each affection gesture, each shared word can rekindle hope in whoever needs it most. I close this moment with gratitude for Pedro, for Clara, for Affection and Courage Network. I learned age limitations can be overcome by collective commitment, by generosity and attentive look. Starting over is possible. Just accept support, create authentic bonds, and allow yourself to participate in life in the present. Winter returned to Chicago, bringing with it the aroma of wet earth, short afternoons, and that habit of leaving sweaters scattered around the house. It was in this season, marked by introspection and warmth, that I realized the cycle of my story with Pedro was reaching a new level. Looking back, I see the path of overcoming, reunions, and building a solid support network that transformed not only my daily life, but that of people around us. Pedro aged alongside me. His steps became slower, but wisdom and gentleness only increased. Instead of running through the park, he began preferring short walks, sniffing each corner longer, as if wanting to store all the nuances of the city that became part of our life. He's no longer the restless puppy. He's the calm guardian, attentive to my mood changes, to breathing that sometimes still accelerates, to the silence of cold afternoons when nostalgia hits hard. Our routine now divides between well-structured mornings, fresh coffee, whole-grain toast, Pedro at my feet waiting for forbidden crumbs, and afternoons of park meetings or gatherings promoting adoption campaigns and emotional health at the community center. Clara, inseparable, definitively embarked on these projects. Our friendship transformed into companionship love, made of listening, respecting each other's time, celebrating small joys and sharing sorrows. The circle of meetings grew rapidly. Elderly, who once lived isolated, now debate topics about aging, mental health, rights, and autonomy. The center's channel gained strength on the internet, impacting families from other neighborhoods, messages received from other districts, reports of renewed hope, and examples of overcoming. Pedro became symbol. His story motivated various elderly to adopt animals, seek therapy, create new habits, or simply allow themselves to feel again. On difficult days, Pedro remains attentive to my anxiety, just one sign of restlessness, and he lies over my legs, the old gesture that calms me. Notably, he became wiser, perceives discrete signals, adjusts pressure, understands when the best thing is just being present without touching, waiting for the right moment for affection. I discovered our learning has no end. Challenges continue, with small physical health setbacks, eternal nostalgia. But the support network proved resistant. Neighbors, friends, children, grandchildren, center volunteers, all form part of the fabric. Pedro, even now older, continues establishing more sincere bonds. His look, his way of welcoming, his role as link in conversation circles and neighborhood workshops. During these last months, we were invited to participate in a local television program about stories of overcoming in old age. Pedro was the undisputed star of the program. His serene behavior before cameras and lights impressed everyone. The host, obviously moved, commented, "In 30 years of television, I've never seen an animal with such human sensitivity." The program was successful, and we received hundreds of messages from people throughout the United States telling similar stories of transformation thanks to their pets. Clara proposed writing a book about our experience. "Pedro's story deserves to be told beyond our neighborhood," she insisted, while organizing all photographs, testimonies, and diary records I maintained during these years. The idea excited me. Imagining our story could inspire thousands of elderly people throughout America not to give up to loneliness filled me with purpose. Community meetings maintain alive the strength of created bonds. We organize Christmas parties, vaccination campaigns, reading events, and cooking afternoons. Pedro is necessary presence, welcoming whoever arrives new to the group, consoling elderly with overcoming stories, and serving as model of daily affection. Clara stimulates the most timid's participation. She herself tells how love alongside Pedro and me changed her way of seeing life. If you've followed our story until here, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and be part of this hope community. Share with family members who might need inspiration, and don't forget to activate notifications for the next overcoming chapters. With age advancement, I accept with serenity time's passage. The body is no longer so agile, but the heart beats stronger in shared moments. Pedro, aged, still distills tenderness, and we celebrate together each morning of overcoming and each night of gratitude. At family gatherings, grandchildren play less with Pedro due to his age, but now they seek to hear my stories and talk about memories from puppy times. They comment that thanks to Pedro, visits are more constant, birthdays more lively, everyone's life more intertwined. One afternoon, while Pedro slept peacefully in his favorite patio spot, I received a visit from Rafael, that young man I met in the park during his first grief days. Now, 2 years later, he arrived accompanied by Luna, a female golden retriever he had adopted. "Mr. Arthur," he said with bright eyes, "I wanted Pedro to meet Luna. She's also learning to be a therapist, just like her teacher." Seeing Pedro gently interact with Luna, patiently teaching her emotional care fundamentals, was like closing a perfect circle. The community center decided to create a permanent Pedro program, institutionalizing animal-assisted therapy for district elderly. We were invited as honorary consultants, and Pedro was officially recognized as Chicago's first honorary canine therapist. The ceremony was simple but moving. Pedro received a symbolic medal and, as always, accepted it with characteristic humility. Clara and I, observing our initiative's growth, decided to formalize our union. It wasn't romantic love, but something deeper, a soul partnership that found purpose in service and mutual companionship. We held a symbolic ceremony in the center's patio, with Pedro as main witness and our entire community present. The Pedro program expanded beyond our expectations. We received visits from social workers, veterinary students, and researchers interested in documenting the therapeutic benefits of animal companionship for elderly populations. Pedro, now a recognized therapy dog, continued his work with the same gentle dedication that first saved my life. Local news stations featured our story, and soon we were receiving letters from across the Midwest. Families shared how they had adopted senior dogs after seeing our interviews, and elderly people wrote about finding renewed purpose in caring for rescued animals. The ripple effect of one golden retriever's love was spreading far beyond Chicago's borders. One particularly moving letter came from a woman in Milwaukee whose husband had Alzheimer's. She wrote that adopting a therapy dog similar to Pedro had brought moments of clarity and joy to her husband's difficult journey. "Your story gave us hope when we had none left," she wrote. Reading her words, I felt the weight of responsibility and the power of sharing our truth. As winter deepened, Pedro's health began showing signs of his advanced age. His veterinary checkups revealed arthritis in his joints and some kidney function decline. The doctor assured us he wasn't in pain, but his golden years were approaching their twilight. This knowledge made each day more precious, each gentle moment a gift to treasure. I closed the cycle of 6 chapters with clarity that genuine love is woven with daily acts, with courage to ask for help and accept companionship, with respect for one's own limits and the need to give and receive care. Pedro brought hope, reconnection, solidarity and meaning to my days, and alongside Clara and the entire community, my present is broader than grief's silence. Finally, I make an invitation. Cultivate real affections, value sincere friendships, allow yourself to be caring. New beginnings are possible for everyone, regardless of age, and can start where least expected, even with a dog's arrival or with a simple gesture of listening and participating. As I write these final lines, Pedro approaches slowly and rests his grey head on my hand. His eyes, though more opaque, still shine with the same wisdom and unconditional love that saved me from despair. I pet his soft fur and whisper, "Thank you, friend. Thank you for teaching me it's never too late to live again." Pedro and my story doesn't end here. Each day I wake up beside him is a new chapter of gratitude. Each person who touches our lives becomes part of this hope narrative. Life, I finally understood, isn't measured by its duration, but by the depth of bonds we create and love we share along the way. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and share it with whoever needs to remember there's always hope. Leave us your own overcoming story in the comments, and let's be together a support network that transcends screens and borders.